Hello, 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 my forget-me-nots. Sleeping lady here. ASMR. So, in this video, we are going to read chapter 2. I am excited to get into this book. I am pumped. Slaying the Giants in New Life, chapter 2. So let's dive in. Okay, let's find the page. There's 3. Now, 2. Destroying your discouragement. You can win the battle and live victoriously. Hands, what simple, amazing gifts they are, and how thoroughly we take them for granted. Carolyn knew what it meant to sit before a piano, allow her fingers to fly up and down her keyboard. She'd fill the house with soaring gospel music. Carolyn could also type 85 words per minute. Needlework, cooking, even something as simple as tying the ribbon on a package. All these things flowed through her hands, and she had taken them for granted. She knew that now. But her hands were only the beginning of what Carolyn lost. When she suffered a stroke in 1991, it was a miracle she even lived. The doctors didn't believe she would make it to morning. Though she did survive, Carolyn had to make a new start on nearly everything. She had to learn how to read, to write, even to speak as if she were a small child. How could so many simple things disappear so quickly? The stroke had come like a thief in the night and robbed Carolyn of nearly every ability except the ability to cry. She did that more than ever before. It was clear to Dorothy that her husband drank too much, but what could she do about it? Whenever she confronted him about his problem, he flew into a rage, which only made the drinking worse, since there didn't seem to be any viable options. Dorothy simply tried to ignore the problem and concentrate on raising their son. She forced everything on motherhood. She focused everything on motherhood. Soon that wouldn't be an option either. One autumn evening in 1995, Dorothy's husband was foolishly handling his gun while he was under the influence of alcohol. His hands slipped off his hand slipped, the gun went off, and the bullet took the life of their son. With her husband in jail, Dorothy was left to the silence and despair of an empty house. She no longer had any real desire to live, but she was also afraid to die. A lifetime ago, at age 13, she had joined a church. But issues of life and death and eternity were all equal miseries to her now. Dorothy remembers climbing into her car late at night and driving for hours in the hope that maybe she'd drift off to sleep and quickly be delivered from her waking nightmare. But something protected her every time. In the daylight, she began visiting churches. It was a good medicine at the time, but the effects wore off when she left the sanctuary and re-entered the roaring silence of her home. What exactly are the limits to human tolerance? What are the units of measurements for pain and discouragement? And how does discouragement threshold differ from mine? I'm not sure about the answer to those questions, but the human spirit can be an amazing thing. Take the case of Lawrence Hanratty, who was named the unluckiest man in New York City. This poor fellow, profiled in the Los Angeles Times, was nearly electrocuted to death in a construction site accident in 1984. After weeks, he lay in a coma with his lawyers fighting for his liability claim until one of them was despaired and two of them died. Hanratty's wife ran off with her lawyer. Oh my gosh. Hanratty lost his car in a terrible crash after the police had left the scene of the accident. Criminals came along and robbed him. Then an insurance company fought to cut off his workers' compensation benefits. His landlord tried to evict him. He suffered from deep depression and agoraphobia. He required a canister of oxygen for breathing and took 42 pills per day for his heart and liver ailments. But a city councilman took up his cause. Neighbors began to rally around him. Incredibly, Lawrence Hanratty summed up his life this way: there's always hope. Losing heart. Would you be able to talk about hope after a string of unthinkable calamities? Have you accentuated the positive and eliminated the negative during the low points of your life? We know the words are true. There's always hope. But sometimes it's hard to believe them. All of us suffer through bouts of discouragement. The dictionary defines discourage as to deprive of courage, to deter, to dishearten, to hinder. All those D words, and you can throw in doom, depression, defeat, despair. The mind dwells on them when life has us pinned down. The New Testament uses these Greek words to carry the idea of being disheartened, dispirited, or discouraged. We always translate them as to faint or to grow weary. For example, Paul warns us to take special care not to become the source of discouragement for our children. Fathers, do not provoke your children lest they become discouraged. That's in Colossians chapter 3 verse 21. Then in 2 Corinthians chapter 4 verse 1, she speaks to those who may become disheartened in ministry. Therefore, since we have this ministry, as we have received mercy, we do not lose heart. And later in the chapter, he encourages us not to become discouraged as the outward man deteriorates, because that's inside us is being renewed daily. Verse 16. And we shouldn't be discouraged by the plight of our loved ones, for in Ephesians chapter 3 verse 13, Paul writes, "Do not lose heart at my tribulations for you." Jesus brings up the subject in the context of prayer. He spoke a parable to them. Luke chapter 18 verse 1 tells us that men always ought to pray and not lose heart. There's so much truth in that verse, that men always ought to pray and not lose heart. There's so much truth in that verse. We must live and breathe and take up residence in prayer, and we're sure to faint. We're to grow weary, to lose heart. It takes diligent faith to live about discouragement. And lest you think this is purely a personal issue, remember that entire nations can run out of hope. It happened during the darkest days of Israel and Judah, when the invaders rolled in and Babylonians destroyed the holy city of Jerusalem, looting its glories and carrying away its people to enslavement in a distant land. It seemed that God's chosen people had lost it all, their land, their pride, their very identity as a nation set apart for a special destiny. For now God's children were dispersed across the nations. These were the darkest times, days of lamentation and weeping and silence. But as Lawrence Hanratty said, there's always hope. A ruler named Cyrus the Persian came to power, and he gave permission for Jewish exiles to begin the homeward journey. In the time of the first return and the rebuilding of the temple, we think of two biblical heroes, a priest named Ezra and an administrator named Nehemiah. Each has a book of its own in our Bible. But there was a time when these two accounts were combined in one longer book. Ezra was a priest to broken hearts, and Nehemiah was a rebuilder of broken dreams. The second one has a liberating lesson for us about the renovation of hope from the rubble of discouragement. Building blocks. The fourth chapter of Nehemiah's book puts us in the middle of exciting times. Nehemiah, the gifted organizer, has arrived in a chaotic situation, but he has galvanized a community and jump-started the rebuilding operation with the walls lying in ruins. The people of Israel haven't had the luxury of peaceful sleep. Raiders from the outlying provinces have been able to attack by night and keep the Israelite settlers discouraged and fearful. This has been done very deliberately. The threat of a Hebrew revival is an unwelcome one to the neighbors. All this talk of rebuilding must be snuffed out. Therefore, the Israelites have been under constant attack from every side. Sanballat and the Samaritans from the north, Tobiah and the Amorites from the east, Geshem and the Arabs from the south, and the Ashdodites from the west. Nehemiah chapter 4 verse 8 tells us the formed a kind of dark alliance to bring pressure of the construction workers, and the greatest weapon in their arsenal are fear and discouragement. But God has different ideas. He has empowered his visionary servant Nehemiah in a mighty way, and day by day the work goes on. Brick by brick, the walls are rising again. Here in the 4th chapter of Nehemiah, as we join the story, the work is halfway complete. The people can smell victory. And yet the wisdom of experience tells us that the midpoint is a precarious place to be. A bit less than half, or a bit more than half, isn't so bad, but it's dangerous to be exactly in the middle. Johnny Mercer's old song, accentuate the positive, says, watch out for Mr. In Between. That's actually rather profound. The Bible tells us that the right in between, at the halfway point, a fresh wave of discouragement breaks out through rumors of Meriwether's, Marauders, Meriwether's, and mayhem. Nehemiah realizes that he must deal with the lagging spirits of his people. I think you'll recognize that the principles he used haven't changed. Nehemiah had to deal with discouragement in the same ways we do. As we review these principles, you're likely to say, oh yes, I've been there. I've done that. Let's discover how Nehemiah handled the problem. 1. Recognizing discouragement when we see or feel discouragement. Factor 1. Fatigue. Vince Lombardi observed that fatigue makes cowards of us all. The wall builders found that to be true. The strength of the laborers is failing, said Judah. Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 10. The construction project required 52 days of back-breaking labor. Halfway finished, the workers had been going at it for a month. Fatigue was catching up with them, and when energy runs short, so does courage. Haven't you found this to be true? You're working 12-hour days, finishing the annual report, you're working on weekends, and you're cleaning the house all day, then helping the kids with algebra homework at night. For a while, you rock along, doing what you feel you must. But sooner or later, your personal limits will catch up with you. Every human body is governed by its own mathematical formula involving time, pressure, exertion. If you exceed the limits of that equation, the cracks start to appear. You begin to be tense, irritable, and gloomy. Those are the times when your enemy, the devil, circles your name on his agenda. As I've become older, I hope I've grown wiser. And one little bit of wisdom I've grasped is that I can no longer push myself as hard as I used to. I'm an odd one to be lecturing to you on this topic, for I've always been type A personality. I doubt that will change, but these days I see the importance of pacing myself. I need to build in a little more margin in my life, and I need to protect those margins. Otherwise, if I push too hard for too long, I'm going to see diminishing returns on the investment of my time and talents. And then the DELUGE, 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 of discouragement. That certainty happened in Jerusalem. The people were weary, discouraged, and one other thing, they were frustrated. Factor number 2, frustration. We've just seen Judah's complaint in the past 5 part of verse 10. We've seen Judah's complaint in the first part of verse 10 when he observes that the workers' strength is failing. He continues, there is so much rubbish that we are not able to build a wall. Have you ever worked for days and weeks on mundane details, then stepped back and wondered if your efforts had any significance? Tired as they were, the Israelites no longer saw the proud, gleaming walls of their dreams. Visions of glory seemed to a mirage in the desert. Mirage in the desert. Mirage in the desert. There was nothing but broken bricks, mud, and debris. The 10th verse records that they were suddenly frustrated with the ever-present rubbish and rubble of weary construction. Have you ever noticed how ugly a building site can be? There will be a sign with a beautiful painting of a glass tower sparkling in the sunshine, and behind the sign is an ugly hole in the mud. At Jerusalem, the old walls had been torched. Now there were great piles of worthless debris everywhere. The frustration of those endless mountains of rubble was weighing on Nehemiah's people. They would nearly collapse in weariness as the sun went down. Then, arriving for work the next morning, it would appear to them as if nothing had been accomplished. It seemed as if the debris had a life of its own and was multiplying. They were burned out. That's a buzzword of our times, burnout. We all use it in the past generations. A man might work his entire adult life at one trade for one employer, then retire after 50 years with a gold watch. If he ever felt burnt out along the way, there wasn't the word to articulate it. Today, we're always shifting careers and pointing to burnout. I've heard it said there are 3 ways to live. You can live out, you can wear out, or you can burn out. I'm hoping to live out, and I'm sure you'll agree that's the best alternative. But we need to define this concept of burnout with care. I hear people use the word to mean working too hard. I hear people use the word to mean working too hard. That's not a definition of burnout. Many of my friends work hard and energetically without ever burning out, because they work with focus and perspective. 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 That's not a definition of burnout. Many of my friends work hard and energetically without ever burning out because they work with focus and perspective. They have something called vision, and they move forward toward attainable goals. The true nature of burnout is working too hard at the wrong thing. It's striving for a goal you can't accomplish, perhaps a goal no one can accomplish. Burnout is pulling the whole weight uphill all by yourself, reaching the summit and realizing you're only going to topple to the bottom to start all over again. It's a feeling of despondency, and Nehemiah's workers were suffering from rubbish burnout. They couldn't see the picture of the shining city, only the debris. In a word, they were frustrated. Factor 3, failure. Nehemiah chapter 4:10, verse 10 tells us so much. The strength of the laborers is failing, fatigue, and there is so much rubbish, frustration that we are not able to build the wall. Failure. The Israelites throw up their hands here and pronounce their failure. Fatigue and frustration are a good recipe for failure. We're tired, they say. We're fed up. We can't do this. This is a great idea, but we've been at it for a month and we can't take it anymore. Negative talk is infectious, spreading like a virus to infect a community. Nehemiah's people hadn't failed at all, but it appeared that way to them. Failure is one of life's giants, and we'll give the subject a chapter of its own later in this book. But for now, let's look at it as a force for discouragement. Failure is universal. Every human being who has ever lived, with no exception, 2,000 years ago, has succumbed, SUCCUMBED to failure. What makes the difference is how we handle our failure. The great danger is letting our negative thoughts and impressions be compounded by the adversity we suffer. Our negative thoughts and impressions be compounded by the adversity we suffer. When things go wrong, we're more willing to give an ear to an enemy. The world's greatest demotivation speaker. When things go wrong, we're more willing to give an ear to the enemy, the world's greatest demotivational speaker. And we slowly but surely begin to buy into his lies and distortions. I haven't accomplished anything at all. We murmur. I'm a failure. Factor 4 is fear. Read the words of Nehemiah chapter 4 verse 1 through 12. And our adversaries said, they will neither know nor see anything till we come into their midst and kill them and cause the work to cease. So it was, when the Jews who dwelt near them came, that they told us 10 times, for whatever place you turn, they will be upon us. We explored this topic of fear in the first chapter, but fear has nothing to do with discouragement too. Imagine the weary workers building their walls in the midst of all the ugly rubble. The job was grueling enough, but there was also the matter of these neighbors stopping by to put a word in their ear. These visitors were saying, we've got a few surprises in store for you. You won't know when, you won't know how, but just when you least expect it, we'll slip in and kill you. We will take you out by increments, one by one, until the walls stand half built with no one left to complete them. Oh my gosh. And nothing derails the work of God's people like a negative word. Everyone who tries to serve the Lord knows the truth of this. I receive my fair share of critical letters. Someone hears me on the radio, or someone sees something we've published, and they attack the U.S. mail, and they attack by you, Ismail. It goes with the territory of having a large ministry. But it's interesting to me how the enemy always knows just when to put out those letters on my desk. They come in times of struggle. They come at the in-between moment when we're just about to regain our focus and move forward for God's kingdom again. That's when the venomous word always materializes from some quarter. We're tempted to say, so that's how people feel. Well, maybe I ought to just turn it in my Bible and quit. Criticism is toxic. Perhaps you're coping with it right now. Perhaps the bitter words of others are eroding your spirit in the workplace or even your home. Perhaps there are people who play on your fears until you become very discouraged. Now that we've recognized all the factors that led to discouragement, how can we respond? How can we respond? Number 2, responding to discouragement. First response, cry out to God. Hear, O our God, for we are despised. Turn their reproach on their own heads and give them as plunder to a land of captivity. Do not cover their iniquity, and do not let their sin be blotted out from before you. For they have provoked you to anger before the builders. Nevertheless, we made our prayer to our God, and that's Nehemiah chapter 4, verses 4 through 5 and 9. Excuse me. I'm going to make a radical suggestion to you. Next time you encounter some major setback in your life, reverse your usual procedure. That is, cry out to God first instead of last. Most of us wait until we're exhausted all other alternatives before appealing to God as a last resort. I don't know about you, but I grit my teeth when I hear someone say, we've tried everything, now all we have to do is pray. Ooh, that's a good perspective, actually. We've tried everything, and now all we have to do is pray. Don't wait until last to look up. Or don't wait until last to look up. Ooh, that's a really good one. Don't wait until last to look up. When discouragement comes, start at the top. When discouragement comes, start at the top. Go to the Lord and ask Him to help you sort through all the issues. May I tell you what works for me in times of discouragement? I sit down with my computer and my journal and I begin to talk to God. I say, Lord, I need to talk to you right now. Some things are going on in my life that I can't understand and I'm having a hard time with it. I need to tell you about it. For me, it helps to begin setting the issue down in writing as I verbalize my feelings to God. As I do this, some things begin to change in my spirit. First of all, I bring everything out of the dark anxiety closet into the light. Writing it down and reading it out loud brings clarity. I discover that things weren't quite the way I thought they would. Thought when they were smoldering within me. I've imposed order on them, examined them in the light. Second, I've done as Nehemiah did. I've cried out to God. This is the most important thing. Sometimes we just need to let go, be a child, and cry out to Daddy. That brings the innocence and dependence that are the beginnings of wisdom. It cuts through our discouragement. If you don't think this is a very spiritual approach, read through the Psalms. when David was beset by worries, and he was beset by a multitude of them, he did exactly what I've prescribed above. He wrote them down and cried them out. He was brutally honest about his discouragement, and you can be too. We can be too. Second response: continue the work God has given you to do. So we built the wall, and the entire wall was joined together up to half its height, for the people had a mind to work. Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 6. Why is it that our immediate reaction to adversity is to quit? Like the angry little boy on the playground, we take our ball and go home. People leave churches, they quit jobs, they walk away from marriages, all because they've encountered the predictable season of discouragement. And of course, that's the worst thing we can do. We always come to regret our emotional walkouts. Satan knows that if we can play on our emotions and get us to quit, he can keep the problem from being resolved. He can keep God's work from moving forward. But take a look at Nehemiah. He felt all the discouragement of his people, but he never set down the trowel, never missed a beat in laying the next brick. He knew he had to keep on keeping on. Yes, there was problems to deal with, but he wasn't going to set aside the mandate God had given him. The people had a mind to work. The scripture tells us Nehemiah helped them see the productive labor is just what the doctor orders sometimes. It's healthy and therapeutic to work off our frustration. Needless to say, it's also a great way to bring a little discouragement to the enemy. Later on, Sanballat and Geshem, Geshem, tried one more stunt to make Nehemiah slow down on his work. They invited him to a conference. Anyone in the business world will tell you that conferences and committees are great ways to slow down productivity. And I've always loved Nehemiah's comeback, so I sent messengers to them saying, I am doing a great work, and so that I cannot come down. Why should the work cease while I leave it and go down to you? Nehemiah chapter 6, verse 3. Modern translation. Please accept my regrets, but God's agenda outweighs yours right now. The main thing is to keep the main thing as the main thing. We need to have a firm grasp on what God called us to do. Put on the blinders and keep plunging away. As we've seen, clear goals are the best preventive maintenance for burnout. Clear goals are the best preventive maintenance for burnout. Clear goals are the best preventive maintenance for burnout. No matter how devastated you may feel, no matter how down in the dumps your spirit may be, keep up the good work. Experience leads me to believe that the times we least feel like working are the times we most certainly should. Let me say that and read that again. Experience leads me to believe that the times we least feel like working are the times we most certainly should. Emotions are treacherous advisors. We need to be disciplined and stay on task. Nehemiah knew his people didn't need to bail. They needed to build. They needed to they didn't need to walk. They didn't need to They didn't need to walk, they needed to work. And our discouragement will have a way of sorting itself out. Third response: concentrate on the big picture. Concentrate on the big picture. Therefore, I positioned men behind the lower parts of the wall at the openings, and I set the people according to their families with their swords, their spears, and their bows. And I looked and arose and said to the nobles, to the leaders, and to the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, great and awesome, and fight for your brethren, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your houses. Nehemiah chapter 4, verses 15 through 14. Nehemiah's men were fanned out across the perimeter, working on little sections of the wall, and that was part of the problem. They were so separated that they couldn't communicate and encourage each other. They were so separated that they couldn't communicate and encourage each other. And you know what this reminds me of? This sentences alone. It reminds me of one of my favorite verses that I live by. And it's in Proverbs chapter 16, verse 24. Gracious words are on honeycomb. They're sweet to the soul and healing to the bones. And I think of a lot of moments or a lot of experiences that I've had that could connect with this, and I believe so. Especially in emotions. Emotions are treacherous. Imagine if we all quit our job just because we had our emotions, you know? But we just have to keep on going. Anyways, they could only see their own little hole in the wall, their own little pile of rubbish. It was very difficult to maintain any perspective. We too tend to reduce the world to the cubicles we work in. Our desk is a dangerous place from which to view the world, said John Lee Carey. Your cubicle may not have a window, but you can always keep one wide open in your spirit. Open it to God, open it to others, hold on to the big picture. Nehemiah workers were down and out. The muddy bricks and the old debris made a discouraging picture, but only a few steps back and a little imagination upward revealed a portrait of the New Jerusalem. You may see nothing but drudgery in your life. You need to see what He is doing in you, with you, and for you. You need to hold on to that hope. What is faith without hope? It will help you prevail in the darkest of times. That is very true. Nehemiah chapter 4 shows how Nehemiah handled the problem. He positioned the people along the wall in rows. Suddenly they could see the unity of their workforce. The proud line standing firm along the walls. Can you see a mental picture of that? Now, the workers could see that every man meant one more section of the wall under repair. Add it all up, and the total is a new city. Once I saw a cartoon filled with a crowd of hundreds of little characters packed together. All looked perplexed, all with identical thought bubbles above their heads, countless thought bubbles, all reading, "What can one man do?" From our side of the cartoon panel, we can see how ludicrous that is. Each little man is in his own private torment, and yet they're not only they're an army. If only they could see it. Don't let the enemy isolate you. Don't let the enemy isolate you. Irma Bombeck is sorely missed. For 30 years, she wrote a popular syndicated newspaper column, published 15 books, received numerous awards, appeared regularly on Good Morning America, and gave a great voice to millions of little people. I miss that voice, for it brought laughter and hope to all of us, but few of her admirers were aware of the suffering she experienced. She had breast cancer, a mastectomy, and kidney failure. She worked through her trials one by one and maintained her grasp of the big picture. She once wrote, "I speak at college commencements and I tell everyone I'm up there and they're down there, not because of my successes, but my failures. Then I proceed to spin all of them off a comedy record album that sold 2 copies in Beirut, a sitcom that lasted about as long as a donut in our house, a Broadway play that never saw Broadway, book signings where I attracted 2 people, one who wanted directions to the restroom and the other who wanted to buy the desk. What you have to tell yourself is this: I'm not a failure. I failed at doing something. There's a big difference." Personally and career-wise, it's been a corduroy road. I've buried babies, lost parents, had cancer, and worried over kids. The trick is to put it all in perspective, and that's what I do for a living. She did it very well. That's why we loved her so deeply. She made us laugh at ourselves and think about life in perspective. She made us look up a moment from the little holes in the walls that define our piece of geography. She helped us remember we're all a part of something bigger. Pastor and futurist Leith Anderson, a good friend of mine, writes the following in his book, Leadership That Works. In the heat of a tough leadership battle, it is easy to lose hope because pessimistic and convince ourselves of defeat. In the heat of a tough leadership battle, it is easy to lose hope, become pessimistic, and convince ourselves of defeat. But as Christians, we must open our eyes to see the view from where Jesus sits. When I am discouraged and my hope runs thin, I remember that I am a part of something much bigger than I am and much more important than the local church of which I am a part. I belong to the Church of Jesus Christ, and the gates of hell will not overcome it. Matthew chapter 16, verse 18. Seeing the worldwide kingdom of God, not just my little corner of it, is enormously encouraging to me. It builds my faith and strengthens my hope. A couple of more pages. From there, Anderson details example. I'm getting tired myself. From there, Anderson details example after example of good things coming to pass in the world because of Christ and his church. He takes us on a quick journey across the globe And we see that many countries where souls are coming to salvation at phenomenal rates. Then Anderson brings us home again. There are now 102 million people attending church each week, he tells us. To make that number meaningful, we look at that other weekend pursuit, professional sports. It turns out that the baseball, basketball, and football games in the United States drew combined 94 million fans during the same year. In other words, more people attend church in 1 week than the professional baseball, basketball, and football games in 1 year. In fact, when all the numbers are crunched, attendance at sporting events works out to about 2% of church attendance. So the next time somebody says, oh, if only people were as passionate about the church as they are about their teams, you need to remind them that pews are 50 times more popular than stadium seats week after week. It's all a matter of perspective. I also like that Anderson tells us about our young people. For every 100 worshippers in their 70s on a typical weekend, there are 160 to 200 who are in their 20s. Does that surprise you? Whoa. Most of us have bought into the myth that young people are staying away from our churches in droves. It's simply not true on a statistical basis. Looking at the big picture, the world is filled with voices of discouragement, but there is one place where we can always go to be lifted. Fourth response: claim the encouragement of God's promises. Do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, great and awesome, and fight for your brethren, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your houses. Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 14. In times of discouragement, run. Don't walk to the word of God. You may hear yourself say something like, I'm too low for Bible reading today. My heart wouldn't be in it. My friend, that's the point. When your heart is ailing, it needs a transfusion of hope and power. I tell people to learn the principle of force feeding. Get the book out, open it up, sit yourself down, tune your mind in, and read the word aloud. These are practical things you can do. Don't wait for your feelings, for you can act your way into feeling easier than you can feel your way into acting. I know how hard it can be. I have those mornings when my spirits are at low ebb as I approach my appointment with God. I speak to Him very frankly. Lord, I need something special from you today. I'm going through a rough place here. I want more than words on a page, more than ideas and spiritual concepts. I need you. I need your voice, and so I'm asking you to meet me in your word today, Lord. Oh, I love that. Meet me in your word today, Lord. That's be so beautiful. There are also times when I've said, I refuse to put this book down until I hear from you, Lord. Don't you think He's pleased by don't you think He's pleased by our yearning to know Him? He's going to answer you if you approach with a determined heart. He's going to help you see just what you need to see in His Word, and He's going to give you the grace that will help you prevail through the bumps in the rocky road of life. This is no ordinary book. God's Spirit dwells in its pages, and He yearns for you to find Him in passages like this one. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore we will not fear, though the earth be removed, and though the mountains be carried into the midst of the sea, though its waters roar and be troubled, though the mountains shake with its swelling. Psalm chapter 46, verses 1 through 3. We can run to the New Testament too. In 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 13, we discover that it's impossible to become discouraged even while doing all the right things. I mean, it's possible. It's possible to become discouraged while doing all the right things. But as for you, brethren, do not grow weary in doing good. Those words, grow weary, carrying the meaning of discouragement. This is a remarkable idea and one I find very helpful. You may be out visiting the sick, engaging in prison mission ministry, teaching Sunday school, working with needy people, or any other good deed. You may be serving Christ with all your heart and still become discouraged. The Bible says don't grow weary in your service. And why? Look to Galatians chapter 6, verse 9 for the answer. And let us not grow weary while doing good. That verse repeats, then adds, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. That is to become discouraged. You see, we find ourselves feeling low because we've lost perspective about whom we're serving, why we're doing it, and how God plans to reward us. We need to remember the reaping. Don't lose sight of those things. Run to God's word. Keep your nose in the book and draw the strength you need to keep your spirit strong. Fifth response, carry someone else's burden. Let's come back to Nehemiah and his massive renovation project. If we read a bit farther into the 4th chapter, we'll find something very moving. We'll find a pattern of people helping one another. Nehemiah's band of stragglers, of the remnant of fallen Israel, had bonded together to become a team. They were unified in commitment. Some were carrying, some were guarding, some were building, and all of them were wearing swords. The final word of the passage is that they stayed up all night. They were too caught up in their work to go home for the evening. Nehemiah tells us they didn't even change clothes except for washing. United we stand. They understood that if we were to prevail, they'd need to watch one another's backs. They'd need to help the weaker ones carry and help the shorter ones reach. They'd need to fill in for those who were older and more weary. They cared for one another's burdens. The discouragement tends to cut us off from doing this. It sends us inward, where pity parties are common and perspective is rare. How often I've forgotten my own little worries when I've been busy calling on someone who was sick, or making my rounds at the hospital. Going in, I've told God that I had nothing to give these people. Coming out, I felt abundantly blessed. Our own burdens become lighter when we've been carrying the burdens of others. That's the way God planned things. He doesn't want you to bear your own load. He wants you to join a burden-bearing community. He wants you to be entrenched in a network of encouragement. Do you need encouragement right now? My best advice to you is to go encourage someone else. You are caught up in your own needs. Go feel the needs of others. You'll reap what you sow, and the love you give will return to you. But some people have actually told me I don't know anyone who needs encouragement. Would you like to know the very best place to find them? In your church. Fred Smith, a businessman, asked a church usher about his responsibilities. The man said nothing more than being there, shaking hands, finding my place in the aisle, taking the offering, and showing up for an occasional ushers meeting. Smith thought this didn't sound very biblical, but he observed in the conversation that his man had a passion about the ministry of hospitality. So many people come to church filled with cares and anxieties the usher had noticed, and they need a warm handshake, a listening ear, perhaps even a hug. The man had found his place to serve God quietly but profoundly. This weekend, make it a project to go to church as a pure encourager. Ask God to direct your steps to someone who needs a dose of love. Look for burdens to bear. You'll find your heart lifted. Pull your eyes away from the discouragement you feel and place them on the courage others have shown. Others like Carolyn, whose story opened this chapter. She had once played the piano, typed expertly, and enjoyed so many gifts. But a terrible stroke devastated her. Still, she set her mind and heart on learning to speak, read, and write all over again. God didn't want them to give up. She told me. God didn't want me to give up. She told me she believed in him and she knew he believed in her. She also had a godly husband and a loving son. Their love got her through the dark night of despair and the long road to recovery. Now she plays the piano and types on the keyboard with one hand, and she is grateful for it. She's grateful just to be alive, and I draw strength from Dorotha, whose husband shot her son in a drunken accident. There were many black months before she came to the end of her despair. One evening at midnight, it all came crashing in on her. She fell onto her knees in her bathroom and called out, "Lord, help me. I'm tired of living this miserable life." It seemed as if the weight of the world had been on her shoulders. But having called out to God, she felt a certain dizziness. There was something different inside her. She knew she could sleep, and that's what she did, deeply, restfully. She began the next day as a new creature. She felt so much lighter, and she actually looked in the mirror to see if she'd lost weight. Her shape was the same as always. It was a face that was new. It glowed. And Dorotha couldn't comprehend the newness of things. She wanted to understand the change that had come across her, but she was a bit embarrassed to ask. In a little second-hand bookshop, she found a book entitled "Here's Hope. Jesus Cares for You," the New Testament. That word hope seemed to leap out at her. That's what was different about today. She took the book home with her and began to read hungrily. It wasn't long before she came across these words: "Come to me, all you who labor and who are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Matthew chapter 11, verse 28. Just that little testimony alone really gives me hope, and I could feel what she feels, especially because she couldn't comprehend things and she was out of rest, and she prayed to God, Lord, help me, I'm tired of living this miserable life. And when she cried out to God, and God's near to the heavy burden, and she finds this book in a bookshop, in a thrift store, a second-hand bookshop, and she actually finds something, and it's all connected, just like how our testimonies are connected in a way or two. If you find your own testimony, you realize that we're not alone, and God's really guiding us, and God's really there in powerful and majestic ways. And she read something that she never read before. Come to me, all you who labor and who are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Matthew chapter 11, verse 28. God changed my whole life, Dorothy told me, mended my broken heart, saved my husband in jail, brought me and my husband closer together, showed us how to love and be loved, and not to take life for granted. And Jesus is the hope of the world. God still answers prayers. God brought Dorothy and her husband into blessed light from the deepest of holes, and I have no doubt He can do the same for you. The depth of the hole can never compare to the depth of His love, the reach of His arms, and the height of His glory. Let's come into those arms. Let's come into those arms, all of us who are heavy laden and feel the lightness of casting our burdens down until our faces shine with the brightness of Dorcas. Oh, and that was the end of chapter 2. I love it. I love how there's actually the truth of life in here. When I say the truth of light, I'm saying like there's actual verses from the Bible in here, and there's actual real testimonies in here from people. That just gives me a lot of hope. How strong are those stories, and how beautiful God created someone, David Jeremiah, to write a beautiful book to help people in need, and people like us, or or even from the lighter of things to more deeper things, and just very filled with hope, I say. And it's like brethren sharpen brethren, iron sharpen iron. That's what it reminds me of. And gracious words are honeycomb, they're sweet to the soul and healing to the bones. I think that's so beautiful. It just pumps me up and gives me hope and light, and that lightness the Lord gives us, and the fire and the spirit. That's very beautiful, and I can't wait to read the next chapter with you guys, chapter 3. But yes, thank you, my forget-me-nots, sleeping lady here.